Anthony was just in there. Check that mic. Check the middle mic. Check the middle mic.
Is this one? Oh. Yes, this one's on. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Temple Israel. Thank you for coming out on this cold, wet, rainy afternoon. I don't think you'll be disappointed. The Temple Israel Endowment Fund and the Jewish Community Relations Council of the United Jewish Federation of Tidewater are proud to present renowned Israeli journalist Gil Hoffman. Mr. Hoffman is the executive director of Honest Reporting, which fights for Israel in the international, mainstream, and social media, a lecturer on political strategy at Israel's College of Management, and served as chief political correspondent and analyst for the Jerusalem Post for 24 years. The Algemeiner website recently named him one of the top 100 people positively influencing Jewish life, alongside Presidents Biden and Zelensky and Prime Minister Netanyahu. He was raised in Chicago, graduated magna cum laude from Northwestern University's School of Journalism, and wrote for the Miami Herald and Arizona Republic before moving to Israel. A reserve soldier in the IDF Spokesman's Unit, he has lectured in every major English-speaking country in the world, more than half the Canadian provinces, and recently made history in Hawaii by becoming the first speaker to have lectured about Israel in all 50 U.S. states. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction, and thank you to all of you for coming. I especially want to thank Richard for inviting me more than a year ago, it seems, to come here, and I'm glad that it has finally worked out, and I appreciate him picking me up at the airport. Also, and thank you to my hosts for this evening, also, and thank you to the rabbi. It's a pleasure being with you here in Norfolk. Did I get it right? All right. My other claim to fame that's not the introduction is that about 12 years ago now, there was a trip to Israel of the Jewish Federation in Boston that I had the opportunity to address in Jerusalem. And afterward, a guy came up to me and gave me the biggest handshake I've ever gotten, and that man was Tom Brady. And he said, thank you for teaching me about Israel. It was a mensch. So that's my only involvement in the Super Bowl. But I appreciate that you came here instead of hearing more and more pregame shows that have been going on for 2 weeks. So, as you heard from the introduction, I've gone around America speaking to people far and wide. I spoke at the synagogue in Hawaii that trademarked the word shaloha, and the synagogue in Alaska that tried to trademark the words frozen chosen. But I've never been to Norfolk for a speech until now, and so I'm really glad that it worked out. And I'm coming here at an exciting time, though it tends to be exciting in Israel. We wish we had less news than we have, and it was intense covering 5 elections in 3.5 years. You know, your elections here last 3 years just for one, right? And so in Israel, having that many elections, I make a point of bringing my little girl with me every time I vote. You know, we're very proud in Israel to be a startup nation. But when it comes to election day, we become a low-tech nation. We take a little piece of paper and put it in a paper envelope and put it in a cardboard box where it then gets counted by human beings. No computer involved whatsoever. We are totally cyber-proof and Putin-proof in our elections. And so even a little girl can vote. And so I took her to vote with me all 5 times, plus the 2 elections for mayor. So she's just turned 6. She's voted 7 times. The election before this past one, when we were parking the car, she says to me, "Daddy, where's the water?" I said, "What water?" She said, "Aren't you taking me on a boat?" And I said, "No, we're going to vote." And she said, "Daddy, we always vote. When are you taking me on a boat?" And so since then, I did take her on a boat. And then I did accept a job that allows me to be with her more time, with all due respect, than the Jerusalem Post, where I was working 24 hours a day, 6 days a week for 24 years. And when I got this opportunity to become the executive director of Honest Reporting, which fights for Israel in international mainstream media, I jumped at the chance, not only because I get to lead the fight for Israel on a very important battlefield, but also because it allows me to spend more time with my children, which is very important. And it wasn't easy to leave my comfort zone in the Knesset, where I'd been for 20 years watching history as it happens. I have a front row seat still with my name on it in the gallery overlooking the Knesset plenum. The taxpayers paid for my gym, for 25 years. But I'm very proud that I left the Knesset without an indictment. I wish that was funny. The other 4 people who left after more than 20 years left with an indictment. It was very symbolic that my last day of work at the Jerusalem Post, the government fell apart. My last day of work, this election was initiated, and it was symbolic because I actually had a small hand in forming that government. I'll take you back in history. When an Israel speaker says, "I'll take you back in history," they usually mean 3,000 years. You'll have to settle for 10. In August of 2012, I had a long conversation with a guy that had just entered politics named Naftali Bennett. And he said at the end of the conversation, "Have you met Yair Lapid?" Yair Lapid had been an anchor man who had also just entered politics. And I said, I had this get-to-know-you meeting with him at his house in Tel Aviv. He's got this man cave with boxing gloves. He worships Muhammad Ali. And I said, not only do I know Lapid, Naftali, but I think you guys would make really good friends. And sure enough, it led. He then asked me for his phone number. And I gave Lapid's phone number to Bennett, and they became the prime ministers in the previous government. Now, in Judaism, and this is important for the Theopolis people, in Judaism we believe that if you make 3 matches, you get into heaven automatically. So I've been told after making 1 political match, if I make 2 more, I go straight to hell. So that government that we had got us really good press around the world because it was really diverse. It had in it right-wing and left-wing and centrist and an Arab party for the first time. It had in it LGBT and homophobic getting along. It had it very orthodox and very not orthodox and everywhere in between, all united under a common goal of trying to end Netanyahu's political career, which didn't work out too well. But it made us look good around the world. The world likes diversity, right? It would have been the equivalent, so diverse, be the equivalent if in America, AOC and Ted Cruz formed a government together as co-presidents of the United States. So the day after our election, where Netanyahu came back to power with a government that's looks a little bit less good around the world, to put it mildly, I heard my staff downstairs, and one of them said to another one, "Our job just got a lot harder, didn't it?" In explaining Israel around the world. And I screamed at him from upstairs, "This is why you were born." Because Israel is fighting right now on 3 battlefields. Here we have a lot of veterans here, Navy, NATO. You understand what a real battle is over here in Norfolk. So we're fighting on the military battlefield, where we obviously have an advantage over our enemies. We're fighting on the college campuses, where we obviously have a great disadvantage. And we're fighting in the mainstream and social media, where it's an uphill battle, but I think it's the fairest fight. And we all can play our part, each and every one of us. Let me just check. How many of you here are on Facebook? Okay. How many of you are on Twitter, still after Elon? Okay. How many of you are on Instagram to see your grandchildren? Oh, more than I was expecting. How many of you are on TikTok? Really? How many of you are on Telegram? Couple. All right. Snapchat? I have my dignity. Yeah. LinkedIn? LinkedIn counts. All right. So, in the end, did anyone not raise their hands on anything? Really? Wow, 5 or 6. Wow. Okay.
I come up with anti-social media.
Okay. Anti-social media. So, all but those 6 people, we're all journalists in one way or another, telling the truth about what's going on in Israel, which is extremely important. We all play our part in making sure people know what's really going on. So before I start talking about our current government and how we got to it, let me give the caveats we always have to give. I don't defend or justify anything my government does in Israel or in the United States. I'm a proud citizen of both countries, but nobody knows who I vote for, and I'm going to keep it that way. That's something that I'm proud of. Even my wife doesn't know who I vote for. The little girl doesn't remember a couple minutes after she put the piece of paper in the envelope. So that is something important. We learned objectivity at the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern, and I still believe that it exists. So, but I can explain and put in context. That I can do. So how did we get to the government that the New York Times and other media outlets around the world call the most right-wing, extremist, far-right, hard-line, any more adjectives I'm leaving out? Government in the history of mankind on this earth. How did we get there? Well, 3 S's. The first S is security. The second S is stability. And the third S is the other side screwing up. All those parties that united together to oust Netanyahu, well, when an election was called, they suddenly turned the knives on themselves. And that is, in part, what brought Netanyahu back. He ran a smart campaign. He realized the people of Israel were sick and tired of having election after election after election after election, proving Einstein's theory of insanity, of doing the same thing over and over and over and over again and expecting a different result. And he took advantage of that. His campaign slogan was, vote for Netanyahu for 4 years of stability. And that really resonated with people. But there's usually an S that decides elections that wasn't a factor this time, before I get to the security. And that is the swing voters. Swing voters tend to decide elections not only in Israel, but in America and around the world. In the past, it was very clear who those swing voters were in Israel, because we had elections that were between right and left. So obviously the swing voters are in the center of the map, like here in Virginia. Back in '96, the most hotly contested election in Israel's history, it was very clear. The candidates for prime minister were Netanyahu, yes, back then in '96, and Shimon Peres. And so they both tried to move to the center of the map. The slogan of Netanyahu in that election was, Netanyahu, osim shalom batuach. How's my singing cantor? Won't quit my day job. Which means, making peace in a secure kind of way. Peace, not really a word associated with Netanyahu at the time. And the slogan of Peres was, Yisrael chazaka Peres. Israel strong with Peres, a word not really associated with him. Our last 5 elections, though, have not been between right and left, have not been on the Palestinian issue on which those terms are defined in Israel. They've been all on one pathetic Shakespearean cliche of to be or not to be. That has been the only question that has been deciding our elections in Israel. We've gotten a lot more shallow in Israeli politics, unfortunately. I'm actually jealous of your politics. Yeah, you guys have elections on issues. You have debates for a full hour and nothing but the economy. We haven't had a debate in Israel between all the candidates for prime minister since that election, 1996. It's been 27 years since we had an actual debate in any election in Israel on anything. So, fortunately, that's what has become with us. Now, so this election, there actually were no swing voters, because it was only about Netanyahu. And every party leader had a point of view. And you probably all know Israelis. Have you ever met an Israeli who doesn't have an opinion about Netanyahu? They either worship the ground he walks on or wish he was never born. There's not really much in between. So the election ended up being decided really on security. And I'm not going to give an opinion about our prime minister. I'll let you fill in the blanks. Netanyahu has either brainwashed or succeeded in convincing Israelis with his unprecedented persuasive abilities that he, and only he, could make the people of Israel feel safe. And that is what ended up deciding our election. There were stability voters who said, you know what, I don't like Netanyahu, I don't want him to come back to power, but he's the only one who could form a stable government. And there were security voters who said, we need to end the violence on the streets, and hope that he could do it. It hasn't worked out so far. But there were 4 countries in our hemisphere that had elections in which the right gained more power around the same time. Besides Israel, there was France, Italy, and Sweden. In only one of those countries were there 382 terrorist attacks in the month before the election. So if anyone wants to call anyone racist, they can call the Swedes racist, but not Israel. 382 terrorist attacks is the kind of thing that influences how people vote. 1 month. Netanyahu's back, and there's no end in sight. He's only 73 years young. His father died at the age of 102. So he could be in power for another 30 years. And if he passes that abolish death bill that would eliminate death, then he could be our emperor for hundreds of years. You never know. Here in Norfolk, during COVID, did your gyms close? Wasn't that annoying? Did they reopen gradually the way they did in Israel? So I've been working out for 25 years in the Knesset gym. And during that entire time, I don't remember anyone allowed to run on the treadmill without headphones other than Netanyahu, who you know when he's there from all the way down the hallway because he blasts his Fox News while he runs on that treadmill. And every other treadmill was closed, so there was a line. And after a while, everybody else gave up, and I'm the only one there waiting for him to finish. I start writing everybody who's run against him over the last 40 years. The man keeps on running, and he won't get out of my way. I finally know how you feel. In all my 25 years covering politics, I don't remember any greater discrepancy between what politicians say publicly and privately than Likud politicians talking about their party leader. If you talk to Likud politicians publicly about Netanyahu, they sound like Christian evangelicals talking about Jesus. If you talk to them privately and they trust you, they sound like Christian evangelicals talking about the devil. It is that big a difference. So he is back, and he is not going anywhere. So what will his government do? First, the non-controversial things like passing a state budget, which is not something you could take for granted anymore. He's going to try to make peace with Saudi Arabia. And the people closest to him told me a few days ago that it's a lot closer than people realize. And last but not least, a key goal for him that we can all agree is important is getting along with the President of the United States, which he did not do with Bill Clinton or Barack Obama, right? Obama, you remember, Clinton, I don't know if you remember that Clinton paid out of his own pocket for his own campaign strategists to work in Israel to try to get Netanyahu defeated in the election 1999, and they succeeded. That's how much he disliked Netanyahu. Biden has been friends with Netanyahu for their 50 years in politics, right? Biden, his famous quote about Netanyahu is, "Bibi, I love you, but I don't agree with anything you damn say." Well, Netanyahu wants to get along with the President of the United States. And the things that made him fight with other American presidents have been resolved in one way or another. So Iran and the Palestinian issue. On Iran, Biden lately sounds a lot closer to Netanyahu than Obama. You know, he made a deal with Iran, and Iran immediately reneged on it. And he felt betrayed. And since then, Iran started murdering people on the streets of Iran and also in Ukraine. And so America is really understanding the Israeli point of view on Iran more than ever. And we just had the largest long-range military drill of the United States and Israel together. And immediately after that, a nuclear facility there in Isfahan in Iran went poof in the middle of the night. I don't know how that happened. But it's all going in the right direction. On the Palestinian issue, there are no hopes whatsoever in the Biden administration to put any pressure for any kind of peace process between Israel and the Palestinians that would lead to friction with the current government in Israel. And it's not because of Israel having so far right-wing a government. It's because of what's going on the Palestinian side. Right-wing, left-wing, centrist governments in Israel have all moved peace processes forward. But on the Palestinian side is where it really matters. And their leader, Abbas, who today said the Western Wall belongs only to Muslims, he's losing it. He's 87 years old. He's been smoking 2 packs a day for 70 years. He's a wonder of medical science that he's still alive today. He was elected in January 2005 to a 4-year term. He's in his 19th year of that 4-year term. So he's not going to turn around and make peace tomorrow or the next day. And when he goes, there will be chaos. And we're already seeing what that looks like right now, where he's already been overthrown. He got overthrown in Gaza. Already it's been now 2014, so 9 years ago. I don't like the word coup so much. I like the word overthrow because it describes how he lost power there. Hamas took his people and threw them off the top of buildings to the floor. They literally overthrew them. And in Nablus and Jenin, his forces just left a vacuum, which is why Israel has to go in there. We're not supposed to be going in there. We don't want to go in there. But when you have to arrest wanted terrorists to prevent them when they're in the middle of planning an attack that they're about to carry out that would kill Jewish, Christian, Muslim Israelis, someone's got to go in there. If the Palestinian forces would be going in there as all the Oslo agreements say they're supposed to do, they wouldn't be firing at them. But when Israel goes in there, they fire at them, and then Israel fires back at the terrorists. And when Israel fires back at terrorists and kills them, then the headlines are about, most deadly raid in history of Israel killing Palestinians, without putting in context that these were terrorists that were ticking time bombs, and that Israel saved a lot of lives by killing these terrorists. They don't put that in the headline. So, but that's what's been going on. The increased tension in the West Bank, and in Jerusalem for that matter, is not because of the government that Israel has today, of it being right-wing or whatever. It's because of the weakness of the Palestinian government and them not fulfilling their obligations and any kind of peace agreement that has ever been signed. That's a very big problem right now. Israel, if anything, wants to be less trigger-happy. We have a new chief of staff of the army, and those are the orders. They want to have less friction. Ahead of Ramadan, doing everything possible right now to make sure that there is no wave of violence and to ease the conditions and improve the quality of life of the Palestinians. That's the goal right now. We'll see if it'll work. A lot of things that could lead to tension are not happening. Israel today removed its second unauthorized outpost in the West Bank. It hasn't built any. Today they decided to legalize ones that are already really advanced as a reaction to some of the terrorist attacks. But it's not as right-wing as people have made it look. And even when their most right-wing minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, possibly the most right-wing minister we've ever had, went up on the Temple Mount, he didn't pray like he had hundreds of times before. He made a point of just visiting. The world made a big deal out of it, even though it was a sign of Israel actually backtracking in its holiest site. And there are other things that were expected to happen that have not happened. There were those who reported this would be an anti-LGBT government. Well, Netanyahu stopped that by appointing Amir Ohana as the Speaker of the Parliament, and in his acceptance speech pointed out his husband of 18 years there in the crowd with his 2 sons on his lap and said, "I will make sure no harm is done to those children or any children, period." There were fears that this government would take steps against the reform and conservative movements. Well, the reform and conservative movements are not treated well by any government in Israel, unfortunately. But will this government do anything to make it even worse? No. They appointed a Diaspora Affairs Minister, Michai Shikli, whose father is a conservative rabbi, and who has defended Reform and conservative Jews in interviews with ultra-Orthodox media. So that's not going to happen either. And when it comes to matters of religion and state, I can only defer to the speech on the day that the Knesset was sworn in by the head of the ultra-Orthodox United Torah Judaism Party, Moshe Gafni, who said to the crowd there in his speech in the Knesset plenum, he said, "I have a message for all the secular and traditional people here at the Knesset and watching around the world. Do you know what changes we're going to make on matters of religion and state? Absolutely nothing." And he said, "I have a message for my constituents, the ultra-Orthodox voters who elected me. You know what I'm going to do that you want me to do? Absolutely nothing. Who talks like that among politicians? This is my opponents, I'm going to give you everything you want, and my constituents, I'm going to give you nothing. The longest serving member of Knesset. He could get away with it. Told the truth. So that's not going to happen either. I guess that leaves the legal reforms is the one thing we didn't get to yet. The most controversial of them all. Netanyahu is on trial. He has 3 cases. He's been indicted on fraud, breach of trust, bribery. The legal system in Israel works very slowly. There are 300 witnesses in his case. They're up to number 25. It might not be done this decade. There's no doubt he is vengeful against the legal establishment that has put him through this. Now, none of the legal reforms would affect his cases. But still, they're very, very controversial. Netanyahu wants to change the way we choose our Supreme Court judges. Right now, the Supreme Court judges dominate the committee that selects their successors. He wants to stop that. He wants to have his governing coalition have a majority on that judicial selection committee. Now, that wouldn't maybe be such a big deal in other countries that have more checks and balances than we do. We don't have a constitution or 2 houses of parliament, legislature like America. And our executive controls our legislative. And if our executive will also control our judicial selection committee, then we have no checks and balances at all anymore. And that doesn't sound too democratic. He wants to stop the Supreme Court from overruling decisions of the Knesset. He wants to enable the Knesset to overrule decisions by the Supreme Court. They've already taken away the independent legal advisors to each ministry and have appointees by the minister, which took away some watchdogs. All these steps are very controversial and have made a lot of Israelis very, very upset. That's why there have been protesters on the streets for every Saturday night for the last 6 weeks. There's going to be a massive protest in front of the Knesset tomorrow. 70 busloads and a group of cars together. I don't know what a word is for that. All motorcades that will be coming to the Knesset from all over the country in order to try to stop it from happening. And the president of Israel gave a very impassioned speech that I watched on the plane right before we took off from JFK on my way to Norfolk today, which he begged both sides to make compromises. The response of the Justice Minister was he's willing to talk, but he's not willing to stop the legislation from moving forward. And it's already starting to come to its first votes tomorrow. Now, there is a long legal process of legislating bills. And politicians, like journalists, tend to not do things until right before a deadline. So I do believe that there will be compromises, but it's not going to be easy, and it's going to take a while. Understand where they're coming from. 5 elections in 3.5 years is a lot of trauma. Netanyahu's people say, we won. We can get away with anything. So why don't we? And the other side says, even though they support some of these reforms and even tried to implement some of them themselves, even what they supported, they won't want Netanyahu to implement because they don't want to give him even a partial victory. That doesn't make it easy to get to any compromise. I still think it'll happen, but only after we look bad a lot around the world between now and then. Which is why it's good that I took that job running Honest Reporting, where our job is to explain what's going on and monitor the media and pointed out when the media gets things wrong. Unfortunately, a lot of the most negative articles about Israel in recent weeks have been relatively true, which definitely makes it more of a challenge. But there's definitely been plenty that we need to be fixing. If you saw any of the reports about the terrible terrorist attack that there was on Friday in Jerusalem, car rams into people in settlement. What? Terrorist drove deliberately to murder a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a man who just got married. And absolutely atrocious to see the way that the world covered it. Jerusalem is not a settlement, it's our capital. We're making progress, though. And it's important because winning on the military battlefield and on the college campuses, the key is to win on the media battlefield. We learned that in the last 2 wars that there were between Israel and Hamas and then Islamic Jihad in Gaza. If you remember the election in May 2021, the war in May 2021, heads in elections, Israel destroyed a tower in Gaza that was referred to as the CNN Tower or the Al Jazeera Tower. Both had their bureaus there. They gave them an hour to evacuate in order to make sure there would be no loss of life, but also enabled there to be a filming of this tower coming down from every possible angle. It took them another month for Israel to reveal to the world that this was the cyber tower of Hamas, and that removing that tower was necessary to save lives. This past war in August, things were run differently. There was an incident where, unfortunately, children were killed in the Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza. And there was a security cabinet meeting at that time. And so the head of Southern Command reported to the ministers, don't worry, we didn't kill these kids, and we have proof that we didn't do it. And so the head of PR says to him, if that's true, let me tell the world right away. And the general laughs at him and says, it's going to take a month to investigate this. We don't want to hurt our operations in the field, and gets up to leave. And then the diplomat, who until recently had the cushy job of consul general in Florida, possibly the best job on the face of this earth, screamed at the general. The consul general screams at the general, Shiv miyad, sit immediately. And everyone stares at him. Never seen such a thing. And then they start saying, you know what? He's right. We really do need to be telling the world right away that we didn't do it. And that's how the war ended so quickly. We went from having a 6-day war to having a 3-day war. And it's always been true that winning on the media battlefield is the key to winning on the military battlefield. And so we're making progress. We at Honest Reporting, over the last 6 months since I took over the job, have gotten 7 virulently, blatantly anti-Semitic journalists fired around the world, including 3 at the New York Times and 1 at CNN. Thank you. People who praised Hitler on social media, people who praised the terrorist attack in Harnof, where terrorists went into synagogue stabbing and shooting people. That was the model for Poway, Pittsburgh, Copenhagen, and the attack in New Zealand, in the mosque. And unfortunately in Neve Yaakov a couple weeks ago in Jerusalem. So these people have, it's a good thing that they're not covering the Israeli-Palestinian issue anymore. I don't want them to lose their livelihood. I'm happy for them to cover Afghanistan or the environment or whatever. But people who are anti-Semitic should not be covering what's going on in Israel. So it hasn't been only the pro-Israel people who've noticed our progress, also been Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran, who have all had reports on their TV stations about Honest Reporting in recent months. Iranian Press TV, which is a 24-hour English propaganda channel, did a half-hour show about me and my team. They showed me, the picture that they showed of me was me holding my little girl as she put the envelope in the ballot box, which was their way of trying to intimidate me. But really, I thought they captured my essence quite well with that picture. I think they really got me right on the money. But we're not intimidated. We're going to keep on doing it because the goal is to restore our deterrence. Just like on the military battlefield, you have to be restoring your deterrence. That's what we have to do on the media battlefield. We want the journalists running scared to make sure that they get things right the first time. And then things will be easier for Israel, even easier on college campuses, I truly believe. And so I'll end with the way that show ended on the Iranian TV. They ended by saying that what's going on with the journalists proves that the Zionist regime is about to crumble. And that could not be further from the truth. It's the Iranian regime that, inshallah, is about to crumble. The women protesters who are so courageous on the streets of Iran, I hope that they succeed, while the people of Israel are going to continue to succeed and thrive, in part because of the support they get from people that care about them around the world, including here in Temple, Israel. So I appreciate you coming and showing your support. And today, may the best team win. Thank you very much. And, thank you to the people watching on Zoom, too. How do they ask questions? How do you do this?
I'm going to grab the microphone here, and after Mark has a question.
Hello. This one works. Okay. First, do we have any questions from the floor? Okay, Rabbi Zoberman.
Hi, Rabbi.
Welcome. We're the same shirts. I'm Uche Fine. You are from Yerushalayim. And I lived in Chicago. I came to Chicago from Israel in '66. I know how you voted. I know how you voted in Israel. I know how you voted. How? It was clear to me from your presentation. Really? Yeah, of course.
Well, if I was a betting man, I'd bet you didn't vote for Bibi.
Thanks for being here with us. A wonderful young man. Tell me.
It's not working.
Hello? Is that working? People of Israel, are you here? Okay.
Not working? All right. You're going to have to raise your voice.
Okay. Well, I said that I know how Gil voted. Earlier he said that no one knows how he votes in Israel. I know that he goes to the right. It's quite obvious. But my question is this. Aren't you concerned that the current government presents some challenges, even threats, to Israeli democracy?
What's the question? That's the question.
You're into it. That's okay with you?
First of all, I don't believe I've given any indication as to how I voted, and there are a lot of people who are on the right and are very critical of the Prime Minister and things that he's doing. So there are people at all ends of the political map and all ends of the pro and anti-Netanyahu map, and it doesn't necessarily jive together anymore. It's not as easy to figure people in Israel out as it used to be. But am I concerned about our democracy? We all are. Even the people who are in favor of the reforms are very much concerned about democracy from the other end. If you ask Israelis, are they concerned about the future of their democracy? 90% of the people say yes. They just have different points of view on what that means.
And some don't want democracy in Israel anymore.
No, that we don't have too much. We're proud of who we are. We're a Jewish state and a democratic state, and that's what we'll always be.
Amen.
Okay. But, we're a work in progress. Israel means struggling with God. Not struggled with God and we already know who won. Not in the future, in the present. We are figuring out what it means to be a Jewish state and a democratic state together. It's complicated. Sometimes those concepts work beautifully together, and sometimes it creates clashes. And now is a time of clashes. We weren't jealous of your hyperpolarization. We didn't like hearing that you have Thanksgiving tables where people can't really even sit together. We weren't like that. Unfortunately, now we are.
Now I have a question.
Sure.
In your presentation, you mentioned that President Biden and Bibi had a long history. They had been very good friends for years, and that Biden was not going to press Bibi on the Palestinian issue. A very large and important part of Bibi's base is the settler movement. He's going to be under a lot of pressure to expand settlements. How do you think that's going to affect Biden's relationship with Bibi?
So that's a really good question, because there's a lot of history there. Biden knows that he screwed up when he was vice president. When he was vice president, he came to Israel to deliver a very positive speech about the U.S.-Israel relationship. And when he happened to be in the country, a building project in Jerusalem was advanced from stage 2 to stage 3 in a 20-stage building process in an ultra-Orthodox neighborhood called Ramat Shlomo. And when that happened, Biden accused Netanyahu of doing this on purpose in order to harm his visit, when the truth was actually different. I know the aide who told Netanyahu that he had just heard on the radio that there was a building project advanced in Ramat Shlomo, and asked Netanyahu if he had heard about it. And Netanyahu's response to the aide was, "Where the hell is Ramat Shlomo?" Had never even heard of it. And then minutes later, he's got Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State, on the phone, screaming at him for 45 minutes. And that's okay, but then telling the press that she screamed at him for 45 minutes. That's more of a problem. What ended up happening was, it wasn't an ultra-Orthodox building project surrounded by other ultra-Orthodox building projects that harmed the peace process in any way. It was the making a big deal out of that building project. That made Israelis say, oh my God, they don't get it. If they're whining about a building project in Jerusalem, these are not the kind of people we're going to take risks for in an actual controversial place in the West Bank. And then that made the Obama administration lose their support among centrist and left-wing voters in Israel that would have been their political base. And Biden knows this. Biden knows that you got to be careful what you protest about with Israelis. You got to protest things that are controversial among Israelis. And Jerusalem's not controversial among Israelis. If they apply more Israeli law to have people over the pre-67 border be governed by more of the laws that are from the other side of the pre-67 border, that's a gradual application of sovereignty. That's not the kind of thing that they're going to be making a big deal out of. Building in existing settlement blocks that everyone believes are going to be the part of the final borders of the state of Israel. Bill Clinton even said so. I don't think they're going to make a big deal out of that too. If they start building in places that look now to be part of a two-state solution, that could be part of a potential Palestinian state, that's the kind of thing that I think Netanyahu would prevent from happening because he wants to get along with President Biden. We'll see.
You have a question from the floor?
From Rabbi. Rabbi's raising his hand.
First of all, can everyone hear me? Yes. First of all, kol hakavod. Very, very happy you're here. I think I speak for our whole group. I want to go back to the three S's. Sure. Specifically the third S, the screw-up of the anti-movement. From your position now, or even more so from your previous you see any signs of that fractured coalition recreating itself, or do you think that ship has sailed?
Wow. Great question, Rabbi. Everybody heard the question? They're going to have to start getting along. They're going to have to start getting along better. Because right now, the fight between Gantz and Lapid and between the leader of the Labour Party, Mirav, and Lapid is just really intense. I mean, they are having a joint press conference tomorrow at 1:30 Israel time. So maybe a sign they're getting along better and at least coordinating. But then they didn't let the Arab parties be part of it, and then the head of the Arab list then tweeted to Lapid accusing him of racism. That's not...
Hey, we don't need the mic that much.
Nice try.
That kind of infighting is not what brings you back to power. They might need to have different leadership. Isaac Herzog has 5 years left. He's young. He could then lead that camp. And things will be easier when Netanyahu retires. He won't be around forever. Then our political map will change. In the end, democracy is a pendulum. It goes back and forth. And it'll go back and forth in Israel too. Under whose leadership, when and where, no one knows.
Phil, you're next. I have a question about another S, and that S is stability. 3 weeks after the government was sworn in, the Supreme Court struck down the appointment of Shah's leader Aryeh Deri to 2.5 ministries. Shah's threatened to quit the coalition if Deri was fired. He was fired. So my question is, has Shah's reconciled itself to the fact that Deri has been fired, or is there still some issue going on there?
Shas is the second largest party in the governing coalition of Netanyahu, and they're not really big on the rule of law. Sephardi ultra-Orthodox, and they're trying to get him back and pass new laws that are specifically for him, even though that's not really fair, and they're going to keep on trying. So they're bypass laws.
So they're not going to bring the government down.
But they're not going to bring the government down. No, none of the parties in the coalition have an interest in bringing the government down because they won. They got what they wanted. They got that homogenous right-wing coalition after the trauma of losing 4 times. They're not going to do that anytime soon.
So it'll be at least 3 or 4 months before there's another election.
The question is, what could bring this government down? It's infighting among the extreme right about calling each other not right-wing enough. You've already seen that in the most far-right party in the coalition, Otzma Yehudit, that the people that Ben-Gvir put on his list are fighting publicly on the radio. One said today that a comment made by another minister in his party was all wrong. So they've already started. They're infighting. And those kinds of things have a habit of snowballing.
Phil?
What journalists or columnists or news organizations do you think are getting it right or writing fairly, even when they're critical?
Would you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. While I think about it. The question is, what journalists and news organizations are getting things right when it comes to Israel? I mean, I'm adding when it comes to Israel, because I have my hands full with Israel, right? When they're reporting about other things, I'm going to have to leave that to you. Wow. We found mistakes everywhere, unfortunately. It's a good thing we exist. Our goal is not to make media outlets more pro-Israel or less pro-anyone else. Our goal is to help them get the story right. Journalists want to get the story right, Phil? And when they get it wrong, they actually appreciate if we can help them get it right. It used to be that when you found something wrong in a media outlet, that you would take the time to write a letter to the editor in print and send it in and hope they read it and hope they publish it, or at least put a correction on page 9. It doesn't work that way anymore. Now, we point out that they got something wrong, and they change it online within seconds. That's how it goes. Now, we have a small team at Honest Reporting. We have only 3 writers. 3. And 1 social media person. That's all. We punch above our weight. And we have help from around the world. People that email us when they see something wrong. Email action@honestreporting.com or gil@honestreporting.com. And that helps. And if you're not on the sign-up sheet of the people that are here, make sure your email address is there so I can add you to get our emails so you'll know what's really going on. Who's getting it right? I'm sorry. I wish I could have an answer for you, Phil. You stumped me.
Renee? Could you speak up, please?
Of the social media outlets that you quizzed us on earlier, are we able to follow honest reporting on those outlets?
Yes. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok.
Thank you.
I've been getting your emails for decades.
Thank you.
Yes.
20 years we're around. We're around for 20 years.
Yes. So, and I'm very pleased to hear that you were actually able to fire someone from the New York Times. To me, that's amazing progress, and I'd like to know how you did that successfully. And also, it's a drop in the bucket, but what are you doing? I mean, now anti-Semitism has evolved. It used to be, Mark and I, a long time ago, used to fight on college campuses, that it was coming from Islamic groups on college campuses. Now it's the college professors. Now it's the far left and the far, I don't want to get into all the politics, but it makes it even more confusing when you have Kanye and people who want to support Black Lives Matter, but then they're putting swastikas on synagogues, and it's like I'm trying to constantly fight myself, but how do you deal with all of this kind of anti-Semitism that just seems to be off the charts?
Okay, so I'll answer both questions. So first of all, what happened was, with the war in Gaza, I asked my team, who are the people who covered this war? There's no freedom of the press in Gaza. Hamas controls Gaza. So they use stringers based in Gaza in the mainstream media outlets. So we checked who these people are. And shortly after that, I hear from my team downstairs, oh my God, Adolf Hitler. And so the guy who covered the war in Gaza for the New York Times, Fadi Hanona, had praised Hitler on social media in Arabic. And so we pointed this out, and the New York Times said they would not work with him anymore. And I got a meeting with Patrick Kingsley, the bureau chief of the New York Times, who's a very professional guy. He's a reporter from 20 countries. I don't believe he's biased, even though his articles lately haven't been too good. An hour before I left to the restaurant, I told my team, hey, give me something to talk about with him. Check other people who've worked there recently. And a few minutes later, I hear from downstairs, oh my God, Hitler again. And so it was a video producer over there who had praised Hitler also, and then the third guy had praised that terrorist attack in Harnof. So we're constantly monitoring anybody who covers anything going on in Israel. It's not just people with Muslim-sounding names. We've got a woman named Katie fired from the Hill. And we're going to make sure that when it comes to covering Israel, it's people that can do it more objectively. And we also have Media Central, which is our arm that works with the press to help them get it right the first time. But anti-Semitism in America is actually beyond our scope. You've got the ADL and your federation and JCRC for that. And Joel over here just started as the head of your JCRC. You should stand up or whatever. Good luck. You're going to have to deal with what she said. Kyrie started criticizing Israel a couple years ago. And nobody criticized him for it. Singling out the one Jewish state is part of the IRA, International Holocaust Remembrance Association, definition of anti-Semitism. And only when he started criticizing the Jews in general did suddenly David Silver, the Jewish head of the NBA, and others throw an uproar. The only one who defended us back then from Kyrie was a wonderful man who, in my heart, will always be the NBA scoring leader, and that's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who is, defended Israel very beautifully. Anti-Semitism, it's no doubt, it's gotten a lot harder on the college campuses, and we're doing media training for the directors of right now Chabad's, and then it'll be Hillel's, in helping them deal with media issues. That's at least within our purview.
I have a question about Supreme Court reform.
But there's a nice lady over there.
I'll get to you.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Ask your question.
Okay.
Most of us read details and just flies by, but we end up with perceptions. And I think that many people in this country, particularly many Jewish people, think that Netanyahu may be trading what is left of democracy in Israel for an autocracy, weakening the power of the court so that even after he leaves office, there will still be an autocracy. This perception, it may be only my perception, but I believe I'm not alone, certainly doesn't help the Jewish people in this country.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't help anything on our college campuses. It is very hard to defend Israel in the face of an autocracy which Netanyahu may be bringing in, or maybe for the good of Israel, but certainly for his own political gain. What is your response?
That's a legitimate point of view.
Right?
It's a point of view of about 50% of Israelis right now.
I hope it becomes 51%.
Well, it only matters if you have an election, or if they're willing to compromise. I can tell you, somebody close to Netanyahu told me a couple days ago. He said they realize that in the end it's better to get 70% of what they want and not 90% of what they want. He said not because what we're doing is illegitimate or wrong, but because it'll have more staying power. And so that's why I think the compromises are going to end up happening, and that will stop Israel from becoming an autocracy.
I've got a question about Supreme Court reform. A very compelling argument can be made that the Israeli Supreme Court is in need of reform. As you mentioned before, the selection process is dominated by the judiciary, which guarantees ideological conformity. The selection process is done in secret, no notes are kept. There is absolutely no check whatever on the power of the Supreme Court. They've decided they can decide any case they want. They can strike down any law that they find unreasonable. Mm-hmm. So are there any Supreme Court reforms that you think would be appropriate? I mean, for instance, Bibi wants a bare majority of the Knesset to be able to overturn Supreme Court decisions. That sounds like an awful idea, but how about a supermajority, 60%?
That's what I think will end up happening. Instead of it being 61 out of 120, it'll be more. But both of you have expressed opposite points of view on the Supreme Court reform, and both of you did not say a single thing that's untrue. That's what makes it complicated. But yeah, I think it'll be somewhere in between the two of you in the end. I think you could have a very nice debate, the two of you, because you're both getting your facts exactly right.
Yeah. How, in all due respect, how is honesty reporting funded?
By nice Jews who care about Israel in places like Norfolk, Virginia. You can go to www.honestreporting.com and click donate in the corner of the screen, or you can talk to me afterward, and every little bit helps. So the slogan of the Israeli Water Authority is Chaval Kol Tipa, every drop matters. And any help that you could give us to be able to start the process of being able to expand our very, very, very small staff and be able to do more monitoring, I think it ends up helping out Israel in many, many ways. I did not plant that question.
Steve?
There's no doubt we are the indigenous people. We've been there 3,300 out of the last 3,500 years. And the San Remo Conference back in the 1920s ratified the Balfour Declaration, and this was the entire world, the League of Nations, saying that the entire land would belong to the Jewish people, including what's now Jordan. And the United Nations cannot supersede decisions of the League of Nations. So by international law, we have every right to be where we are. If anything, it could be called disputed territory, because the 1949 armistice line was where the fighting ended temporarily. It's an armistice line. And the final borders then get decided in negotiations, which are currently on hold until the Palestinians have the kind of leadership that are willing to make the sacrifices necessary to help their own people. Disputed territory, it is. Occupied, Jerusalem was occupied by Jordan between 1948 and 1967. That was occupied. They burned down our synagogues. Since then, when there's been religious freedom, and the fate of where people live there, Jews and Arabs, will be decided when a final border is drawn. Until then, the area where 99% of the Arabs live in the West Bank is controlled by the Palestinian Authority and has been now since the mid-1990s. Lots of legal arguments here and there, but you're right. Brett was my boss. I have a lot of respect for Brett.
I read him all the time. See him on the YouTube and all. I was just curious if you had any relationship.
Sure, and it, again, shows how complicated being right-wing is, because Brett is anti-Trump, and Brett is anti-Netanyahu, and Brett is unquestionably right-wing. So.
Go ahead.
You mentioned before Israel does not have a constitution. Is there any hope that at one point or other they will go try and produce such a product?
The question is Israel going to get a constitution anytime soon? And the answer is probably not, because the minorities are afraid that a constitution would not protect them, that a constitution would be passed by a majority at the expense of the minorities. The Arabs and the ultra-Orthodox are more worried about a constitution than anybody else. England doesn't have a constitution. It's legitimate to not have one. It's hard enough to get a consensus on uncontroversial topics, let alone to write a constitution right now. So no, I don't see it happening anytime soon, sir.
Bill?
Two quick questions.
And then remember, there are questions on Zoom, aren't there?
Oh,
Are we not on Zoom? Live stream? Then how do they ask questions? Well, they can email me at gil@honestreporting.com, and I will answer their question later. Those of you, I don't know how many are watching on live stream. I appreciate you taking the time to watch. If you're flipping between me and the Super Bowl preview shows, then I can't answer your questions about football too well, but I can answer your questions about Israel. Yes, Phil.
Two different questions. One, like you said, every article seems to say this is the most right-wing government in Israel. Do you see that as true or not true?
We don't know yet. It's too soon to say.
But as of this point,
They haven't done anything yet.
so that actually connects to my
Today they started, by the way. Maybe until this morning I could say they haven't done anything yet. There was a decision today in the wake of the terrorist attack in Jerusalem to take steps to retroactively authorize 9 illegal outposts. That was a right-wing thing to do.
The other question I had is, you mentioned the minister saying, we won't touch LGBT rights, we won't mess with non-Orthodox rights. What makes you confident that they're going to stick to it, that they're not going to be pressured by their base and go back on it?
Because Bibi, the buck stops with him. During coalition talks, when Netanyahu gave in over and over again to his potential partners, people thought, okay, that's how he's going to be after the government is formed. When the truth is, strategically, Netanyahu learned from his first term in office that you do have to give in during the coalition talks to get the political stability and quiet in order to be able to govern. He didn't back then. In 96, he was a lot more careful. He was worried that people would complain if he appointed too many people, he'd been wasting taxpayer funds. He was cognizant of such things back then, much more so than now. And he regretted it. He regretted being too careful because he made enemies that bothered him for many years because he didn't give them the appointments that they wanted. And so then his people are already telling me shortly after that that from now on he's going to overpay in coalition talks. And he did. And then once he became prime minister, he retook control. There was case after case. He fired Aryeh Deri, as Mark pointed out. I think so, yes. He removed those outposts, even though his Smotrich finance minister didn't want him to do that. He didn't let Ben Gvir pray on the Temple Mount. And he's not giving the ultra-Orthodox everything they would want to get. Money they'll get. But, he's not going to let anything happen to Reform and conservative Jews, and he's not going to let anything happen to the LGBT community. Those things are important to him.
Just one last comment.
Sure. Comment, right?
That since Menachem Begin, every time there's a government that's voted in, it's the farthest right-wing government they've ever had. It's worse than the ones before. And every government since 1980 to 79 has been the furthest right-wing that has ever come out of Israel. It just seems to me unrealistic.
Just keep in mind that when they're talking in the international press that Israel's taken a harder line, and they're dating it back to a year from now when the violence intensified, we did not have a right-wing government back then. And what has happened is that unfortunately there's been a wave of terror that we've had to respond to. And that would happen whether we had a left-wing government or a right-wing government or anywhere in between. That's right, and Nixon went to China, and never underestimate what people can do.
Rabbi?
For those who are joining us for the first time this year, the entire adult education program of Temple Israel this year is called Israel Beyond the Headlines. And this is the capstone program for the entire year's worth of adult education. Sir, a lot of our adult education has to do
1,000 such kinds of interactions that we can multiply other between. Is that more or less what it is anytime we go there, or do you see significant changes? Is there some sort of incipient segregation which is happening, or just not?
And their interaction is constant. You pointed out the pharmacy. Yes, the overall majority of pharmacists in Israel are Arab women. I don't know why. Just like the overall majority of optometrists in Israel are French.
Well, we believe that the overwhelming majority of rude supermarket clerks are Russian elite women.
Yeah, that's a stereotype, but a lot of evidence to that stereotype. But we all have to find a way to get along. All the different people from all over. You know, I'm an immigrant too, and people make fun of my accent. But yeah, if you go into the hospital, God forbid, I think it's where you see it the most, where you have doctors named Mohammed and Menachem Mendel are working together to treat patients named Mohammed and Menachem Mendel, without regard of who they are and who they are. And that's really beautiful. The graduates in the medical schools this past year are disproportionately Arab. We are not separated. We are very much integrated. And we have to find a way to make do with sharing what we have as best as we can. We have a last question before the game.
I have a question. I have a question about Israel has had to walk a tightrope with regard to the war in Ukraine. Number one, they have a huge Russian population. I'm not sure, but they probably have a lot of Ukrainians.
Sure.
And probably the most difficult factor is Russia rules the skies over Syria, and Israel needs Russia's cooperation to be able to interdict Iranian weapons shipments to Hezbollah.
These are part of the answer.
Well, anyhow, so take it from there.
Yes, Naftali Bennett and now Netanyahu also have offered to mediate between Putin and Zelensky, in part because we're in this really complex situation, whereas Mark points out, we've got Russian immigrants in Israel, we've got potential Russian immigrants in Russia, and Ukrainian immigrants on both sides. We do need to be able to have freedom of movement in the airspace above Syria, which is controlled by the Russians. You used to have a vice presidential candidate here who said she saw Russia from her window. Well, we really do. Russia controls Syria. And so we have to be careful. That's why mediation also was a smart option, because we could also do it, because we have close ties with both Putin and Zelensky in Israel. It could still happen. Netanyahu is talking about mediating now too. And wouldn't it be nice if an agreement to end that war ends up being reached in Jerusalem? You know, the word Jerusalem means we will see peace. So please God, may we see peace.
Would you take one more question?
No, it's a good way of ending.
What's that? Would you take one more question from the audience? I don't want to hog the last question. Anybody else have a question? Going once?
You're going to throw out Russia. How about China? Are there threats? Like at one time that there was concern with the ports in Haifa with China. Does Israel see that as
Not really.
Well, could you repeat the question?
Questions are we worried about the Chinese influence in Israel? They've made a lot of investments in Israel. We've made a lot of investments there. But when America says to stop, we stop. Because our relationship, our bipartisan relationship with the United States is our top strategic asset and always will be. My talks in America and college campuses are co-sponsored by the college Democrats and college Republicans. And when that happens, I ask them, hey, when was the last time you guys did a program together? And they tell me, last Yom Ha'atzmaut, last Israeli Independence Day, because we are a consensus issue. in America at a time of hyperpolarization. We want to be what unites America. And please God, we always should be. Thank you very much.
One more thing, ladies and gentlemen. One more thing. One more thing. When you get home tonight, go on the internet, type into the search field honestreporting.com, all one word, and hit enter. Check them out. They do a lot of important stuff, and up on the top you'll see a little red box that says donate. Unsolicited testimonial.
Who's going?